Dan will come around with the microphone. If you raise your hand, he will come right to you.
You said you're dealing with higher education. The Jesuits recently came to the conclusion that they're selling off a lot of the colleges. It's kind of too late to reach the hearts and minds in college, concentrating on the high schools. How can we get it down to the lower levels, because these kids are completely brainwashed by the age of 8?
Right. I guess the honest answer to that is I don't know. I think that we certainly recognize that the indoctrination in sustainability begins as early as kindergarten. There is a small film called The Story of Stuff, which is basically a bit of environmental propaganda that takes capitalism to task for creating things that people want. And so it begins very early. One of the leverage points that we can possibly reach are the schools of education. The reason that this is so embedded in our schools is that the teachers arrive there with this as their one big idea, to create social justice and good for the world. The teachers think this is what we need to give our students. So as far as an organization like ours is concerned with higher education, schools of education are a pressure point.
Peter, a person who cares about stewardship might come to a lot of the same conclusions as the sustainability movement about maybe avoiding plastic, recycling. And so how do you distinguish between a person who's advocating good stewardship and a person who's advocating sustainability?
Right. Well, apart from my sometimes facetious humor about wanting to increase my own carbon footprint to save the world from global cooling, I too think that stewardship is a very good idea. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I know what pollution looks like, tastes like, smells like, and I think that the world is a much better place for the environmental movement of the 60s and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Personal commitment to things like recycling and sort of a clean lifestyle are things that I find perfectly anodyne. I don't think they're going to change the climate any. I would fight against the delusion that people have that these microscopic efforts mean much in terms of this larger problem. But I think the direct answer to your question is that the sustainability movement is only superficially about environmental issues. For sure, those are in there, but you can take all the environmental issues you want and clasp them to your chest and say, I'm going to do this. You're still not at where sustainability is. Remember that Venn diagram with its 3 circles. The other ones are the economy and social justice. The views of the sustainability advocates when they get going are that we have to eliminate this terrible thing called the free market and the cycle of investments in capitalism, because they're deep down about extracting wealth from the earth and destroying things in the process. So eliminating capitalism, ultimately for some of them eliminating private property, are the real game to be played here. On the matter of social justice, there are profound and important debates to be had about social justice. It's not a term to be scrapped or an idea to be avoided, but the form of social justice preferred by this movement is one that, if you follow it through, does away with democratic representative government. You just can't trust people to make collectively the decisions they need to make. Therefore, you end up with people like Tom Friedman at the New York Times repeatedly wondering, I wish US could be China for a day, because then we could just impose our agenda. We quote in our report a sustainability guru in Australia who is all out on just saying democracy and representative government, that's a suicide pact. We've got to move to dictatorship right now. They don't call it dictatorship, but that's pretty much where this is. So what do I say to somebody who wants to lead a green lifestyle? I say, go for it. What do I say about how that differs from the sustainability movement? Watch where you step.
Could you comment if there's a connection between the decline of religion and the rise of the transfer of guilt from religious guilt, which we all have in one degree or another, to guilt over the planet? I mean, when I struggled to open this bottle with my arthritic fingers, I could have, done one of those instead. So would you comment about that?
I'll be happy to comment. Rochelle alluded to this briefly in her remarks. I should say that while we do entertain this line of thinking for a few pages in the report, it's not a central focus. This is much more a matter of, I'm an anthropologist, we anthropologists give ourselves license to think through connections that might not be so easy to prove. There is a French social theorist named Pascal Bruckner who has made the most of the idea that the sustainability movement is a kind of substitute Christianity for a secularized West, for the many people who can no longer believe in a transcendent God. There is just this aching need for something that points towards redemption and salvation. The sustainability movement rather nicely mimics or follows just about all the pieces of Christian theology. There is an apocalypse, there is a form of sin and expiation and acts of penance for which one can separate oneself from the sinful. There's an idea of original sin, and that our mere existence as creatures has about it something that is earth-destroying, and we need to redeem ourselves from that through these aching efforts to prove that we are worthy of a redeemed nature. The language of the sustainability movement is utterly saturated with the language of religion, and there is this call for creation of a new Eden. Some think that it can be brought premillennially, others postmillennially. If you're involved with that particular piece of Christian history, the world does not settle easily for the kind of secularization that does away entirely with what religion provides. And when we raise generations who have no grounding in Christianity, Judaism, other world religions, something rushes to fill that vacuum. The sustainability movement fits that bill rather well. Is it completely explained by that? No, I don't think so, but I think that does form an interesting part of the backdrop of where the movement came from. But speaking of such backdrops, it probably would be important to add that the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism as an alternative faith to Christian worldview is part of this picture as well. As communism went out, sustainability came in, and they too fit into some of the same parts of the intellectual spectrum. That is, there's a new world order that can be brought by force of human will, and that's much of what sustainability does too.
Would you again say the name of the kindergarten film, something Stuff?
It's The Story of Stuff, that easy. Actually, Ashley, where are you? This, Ashley Thorne, my executive director, before Rochelle took the tiara to be Queen of Sustainability, she took it from Ashley, who with me wrote something like 250 articles about sustainability, some of which dealt with the issue of the story of stuff and efforts in the schools. You mind grab the microphone from?
Yes, it's a short film illustrated by cartoons. It's now a book that is being used as a common reading for freshmen before they enter for their first year of college. And Annie Leonard, who's the star of the short film, has also come up with another book. I think it's called The Story of Bottled Water. Okay, yeah.
Have you found some difference in the attitudes towards the market as opposed to technology writ large? Because those two elements are, they get brought together, or blended together sometimes in the discussion here, and sometimes the opposition. But I wonder if you saw some duality there.
Well, I can think of an anecdote that plays pretty directly on that. Probably a fair number of you who are at least from New York saw the climate march back in September, and it was rather full of people carrying signs denouncing capitalism and repeal the Industrial Revolution and things like that. There was one striking interview that I saw where somebody challenged them and said, if you really believed all this, you'd throw your cell phone away. And one of the guys stepped up and says, I don't have a cell phone, I never would. So his commitment to sustainability went so far as to eliminate the conveniences of personal electronics. Technology is, however, not shunned by the sustainability movement. It firmly believes in electric cars and extracting energy from sunbeams and moonbeams and tides and so forth. Whether that technology will ever come close to being economically competitive with fossil fuels, if it does, it's probably centuries away from that. The hatred of the marketplace that created that technology, however, is part of the fundamentalism that we're talking about. The true believers in the sustainability movement, for the most part, think that capitalism is the problem. There are those who think, like Naomi Klein, that capitalism should just be wiped clean. There are others who find ways to accommodate it, as with cap and trade or various versions of crony capitalism. The spirit of it is we might have to endure capitalism a while longer, but we'd really better be off without it. I don't find anybody of Arthur Brooks's optimism about humanity finding deep attraction in the sustainability movement. Now, possibly it's been a big world. There's somebody out there who's managed that synthesis. I haven't met them yet. I think you have to view basically sustainability and capitalism as orthogonal, and the love of technology is just one of the idle hypocrisies that gets wrapped into it, like Al Gore with his multiple mansions and his jet travel. If you really believed that the world was dying of carbon dioxide poisoning, he'd lead a different life. But many of the people in the sustainability movement are much more heartfelt than that. There was a young woman who graduated from Wesleyan last year with her liberal arts degree, knew exactly what to do. She moved to Hawaii, where the temperature was temperate. She put up a pup tent, and she started growing a vegetable garden, and that was going to be the rest of her life. Now, recently I saw her back in New York City, so maybe that's not working out quite so well.
Picking up on what Arthur Brooks said, who would be the victims of sustainability that we could champion instead of only attacking, the movement?
Right. Well, the victims that concern me most are college students who are being miseducated. They're being deprived of education they should get, and they are getting as a substitute for it pretty hardcore indoctrination. Now, every student, no. Plenty of students have the ability to shrug things off. Every college, no. There are a few exceptional places that haven't yet drunk the Kool-Aid. But basically, we are sacrificing this generation of students to an ideology that just deprives them of any deep knowledge of their own history, any understanding the values of this civilization. It has taken them to a place where they graduate from college with a kind of shivering fear that the future is very, very bleak. They should live for the short term. Why are students piling on this enormous and insupportable debt? Well, if you think the world is going to end in a few years, maybe your debts are going to be expunged by then. I mean, there's a very strong component of fantasy that enters into the sustainability movement. That fantasy is something that college students should be on their way of growing out of rather than going deeper into. So those are the victims that concern me most. Of course, there's plenty of other victims out there. American taxpayers are victims of this. We've invested billions of dollars in Solyndra-like companies that go under because they cannot produce products that the market will pay for. The victims that one of our appendices addresses and which Arthur was also drawing attention to are the inhabitants of much of the non-developed world. The sustainability movement calls for not developing the sub-Saharan Africa. Is that what sub-Saharan Africans want? No, they want power, electricity, running water, clean air, and so forth. But we're not going to let them have it. In the name of keeping the world sustainable and Edenic, we're going to put them back where they can avail themselves of stone tool technology and the remnants of the West, and that's it. So victims aplenty. I feel gratified that I've answered, almost every question.
And just a comment. I was thinking about what you said. Could it be that this whole thing is a conspiracy by very smart corporations to create a generation of morons that will grab their product? Again, I point to to this piece of plastic, this tiny piece of plastic that you can't open, but that someone feels good about using it. Or Elon Musk, who I think is a genius, who's selling cars run by coal and convincing people somehow that this is a wonderful godlike thing to do. So let me toss that up as a question. I'm going to say it's a conspiracy by some very smart corporations.
Well, I find most conspiracy theories entertaining but not convincing. I do think that there are plenty of people who are earnestly convinced, both intellectually and morally, that this movement is valid. Are there corporations willing and able to manipulate it to their advantage? For sure. The world is full of people who can see where a dollar can be made on somebody else's delusion. And I think that it would be incorrect to credit those hustlers as sufficiently clever to have created Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein. People who are leading this movement are smart, but they're not really conspiratorial. They are charismatic leaders. If you have not had the opportunity to see Naomi Klein or especially Bill McKibben speak, they're mesmerizing speakers. It's not at all surprising to me that they touch something in students who have this deep thirst for wanting to belong to something bigger or more important than themselves, and who cannot find or have not heard the appeal of a transcendental religion. This gives them an immanent religion, although some of them have turned it back into a transcendent religion. Again, on the climate march, we saw big images of Mother Earth as a deity being paraded through the streets of Manhattan, not as a metaphor, as a real object of worship. And that's part of the movement too. A fellow anthropologist at Emory named Peggy Bartlett has called for the re-enchantment of nature, and she again means it literally. The world of fairy tales is back upon us. Conspiracy? No, just bad thinking. Dan.
Thank you. What is it that drives this movement that what for a while was anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, to indoctrinate rather than educate students, and to not teach them how to think, but to teach them what to think? Now it seems to have morphed into sustainability. What is the drive? What is the foundation of that movement that continues and takes different forms? Thank you.
That's a really hard question. let me see what I can do with it. One aspect of it, I think, is that this is a top-down movement. That is, it didn't come like the civil rights movement out of the distress of individuals over manifest injustices in our society. It was perpetrated on college campuses first as a commitment of college presidents. Now, there's a story there. At the 2012 Rio Summit, John Kerry met, not for the first time, but for the most important time, with Teresa Hines, his future wife. They came away from the summit with the realization that while they thought climate change was the big story of our times, hardly anybody on college campuses cared about it. So they came back to Boston, where they created an organization called Second Nature. And Second Nature's avowed goal was to bring climate catastrophism to the college campus. And it did that by holding salons where they invited small numbers of college presidents and sort of talked this up to them. That eventually took the form of the creation of this document that we've referred to several times, the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, which once signed, not only commits the signee to reduce the carbon footprint of the institution to zero, it also commits the institution to making the pursuit of sustainability the supervening value of the college. It is going to be the dominant consideration in the creation of every course, the definition of every major, everything that everybody does. Now, this basically got signed in the dark of night. Nobody went to the faculty and said, is this a good idea? It didn't come by a bunch of students occupying the president's office saying, we demand this. This came from college presidents saying, how am I going to make my mark on this institution's history? I know I'm going to sign us up to this program. Having signed that, several things followed from it. One was that to win favor with the college president, faculty members realized, hey, this is an important area to do research in. Hey, my president is willing to commit money to this. So beginning in the late 90s into the first part of this century, we had this instance in which faculty members were increasingly being bought into a commitment for sustainability. Word from the students, flat, nothing. Students just weren't interested in this. But give a college campus with a sufficient number of committed faculty members and an administration that says this is the big deal, sooner or later students are going to get on board with it. And that's what happened. Now, why is this a movement that rejects persuasion in favor of coercion? Partly because it's always been something that's driven by the sellers rather than the buyers, and it's one way to put it. This is a movement that saw the need to recruit students and then set about trying to find a way to do that. And upon encountering not a little but a lot of student resistance, it turned to tactics of coercion, of nudging, of redefining the English department's curriculum to do away with classic works of English literature and substitute books about farming and whatever, the beekeeping is one of them, a big one these days. I'm sure that's not all of it. There is clearly in higher education right now a broader kind of rejection of free inquiry. We see that in the sexual assault stuff going on, where George Will can't mention any doubts without getting booted off campus. We see it in many areas in which NAS does work on racial preferences in higher education. There's whole subjects now which meet walls of censoriousness. So to that extent, the sustainability movement is of a piece with a broader rise of intolerance in higher ed. I feel like I'm wasting a wonderful opportunity here, and that I've got 4 great experts on this, and the questions all seem to be coming to me, so please.
Well, I'm Will Happer, and having lived on campuses all my life, I would add another problem is industry itself dumps huge amounts of greenwash money on to universities at Princeton, we get hundreds of $millions from British Petroleum. Stanford gets even more from Exxon. And it's essentially to show what good, sustainable companies these are. And so it funds all of these extreme sustainability movements on Princeton and at Stanford. So it's industry itself.
Right. Stanford was the first large university to partially divest from its fossil fuel investments in its endowment. Princeton hasn't yet.
A lot of good questions have been asked and answered. I wonder if our speakers, Arthur Brooks, Herb London, and the others, would comment on any. Are you burning to make any comments or additional comments to some of the questions have been asked? I'd like to hear your comments as well.
The difficulty that you have with so many of those in the sustainability movement is they do not recognize the costs of what they are doing. When you talk about a risk-free America, and the preeminence of the movement, of course, is to reduce risk. But when you eliminate risk, you also eliminate innovation. Innovation cannot occur unless there is some level of risk. And so the real danger here is for those very people who would benefit from the innovations in the future. If you do not have them, there's a cost to pay. That is never in the calculus. And it's so interesting to me that people who talk about the free market and say, well, we should be looking at what the free market means, also do not take into account the fact that if you do not have any risk, then what are the consequences of that? That it strikes me as an interesting position to observe.
I'll add one comment just about the way that sustainability is taught. It's been mentioned already that there are more than 1,400 degree programs in sustainability, but increasingly sustainability is being integrated into other classes. That's one of the commitments that presidents make when they sign the President's Climate Commitment. We've seen sustainability inserted into the mission statements of many colleges and universities. We've seen the creation of entirely new programs such as the Environmental Humanities, which is kind of an attempt to shoehorn all of the humanities into the environmentalist camp and somehow make them productive on that front rather than on the traditional humanities front. And the proliferation of these courses is further evidence of how popular this movement is and how difficult it is for students to get any other message besides sustainability. It's not just a subject that they can opt into, it's increasingly something that they encounter just as a de facto part of their education.
I can imagine a dissertation, Shakespeare on sustainability.
I'm sure it exists.
I've just been nudged. We need to wrap up. I want to first thank Arthur Brooks for just an extraordinary performance and an enlightening one. And I understand that AEI is about to move to a splendid new headquarters in Washington, D.C. We'd be happy to take the crumbs and move into your old building. But no. AEI is just a tremendously important institution in this country, and it is blessed to have Arthur running it, and we are grateful to have him here to give luster to this event. I'd also like to thank Herb again as chairman. He is splendid. Neil Ross, our association with Spiked, is beginning, but we expect our report is going to be noticed internationally for the first time, and that will be due to our friends at Spiked. And Rochelle, thank you for just great work on this. Thanks to my staff, and I appreciate all of you coming out today for this event. Please read the report and talk it up to your friends, and let's try to make this an important beginning of a counter movement in higher education.